Good evening, Mrs. Linsenmeyer. I will be directing my speech just at you because I am talking to a camera in my computer screen rather than a classroom. My speech topic is over Big Pharma, which, if you do not know, is the act of larger pharmaceutical companies taking advantage of the not necessarily lower poverty line, but just everybody as a whole. They're capitalizing on it and taking advantage of people. So let me go ahead and get started with that. So obviously I can't see your hand, but what I would like to ask is just to kind of make a connection is if you have ever been prescribed any sort of medication ever. It could be Mucinex, or it could be depressive medications, or it could be an antibiotic. It truthfully doesn't matter because all of it inherently buys into big pharma, right? Because pharmaceutical companies make all of these. So uh, now that you've kind of, moved past that, the reason I'm choosing to cover Big Pharma is because I believed it to be one of the most cruel and like corrupt and just like overall just egregious forms of of government that we have. It's not necessarily a part of the government, but it goes hand in hand, if that makes sense, because healthcare and government are tied, and Big Pharma runs healthcare because they've monopolized everything. So also, I've been actively involved by or being taken advantage of by Big Pharma my entire life. I've been on medication since I was born for a number of things, the most important one being my ADHD medication. The gray area can seem extremely vast when researching a topic such as Big Pharma because some people believe it to be like a conspiracy theory almost. And it's, regardless of its conspiracy theory or not and how you feel about it, it's still continuously harmful to the future and current generations of the people today. Um, and it's just it needs to be talked about. More people need to be educated on big pharma as a whole, because it's America's field of medicine, and we're letting them take advantage of it, and that's not okay. So, big pharma is a cluster of pharmaceutical companies that actively engage in inhumane and unjust methods of medical healthcare. Right? Just a bunch of think about it as like the railroads way back when, how they monopolized all of the railroads. It's like that with big pharma. It's the same thing. So the reason that this problem is so important to me is that when considering the level of inflation that takes place even outside of medication, it's even like the smallest stages, it remains like self-evident that in no way does it benefit anybody other than the people that own the company because it's the people on top that get the most money that have the power, right? So I let me delve in on like why it's so huge. So the severity of this problem lacks in the ethical allocation of their funds. That's one of the hugest issues, right? Now, an illustration that I have is says that from 1998 to 2016, Big Pharma spent nearly 3.5 billion on lobbying expenses, more than any other industry. 3.5 billion more than any other industry, not just 3.5 billion, 3.5 billion more than any other industry. Now, lobbying, if you don't know, is them paying other people to side with them, which is extremely unjust and another form of corrupt government, right? So, the people that are affected by this lack of allocation is like literally everybody. It affects every single person that takes part in any sort of. It shifts all of the power of the people who own the companies, and it affects hospital bills, insurance coverage. Pharmaceuticals are all inflated to an extremely high cover or an extremely high like payment to cover the budget of big pharma, which their budget is their lobbying ads. They spend like 10% of their money on actual medical benefits, and that's the problem because all they're doing is making themselves rich by benefiting off people by giving them stuff that's not as effective and sometimes almost bad for you. And that's really a huge issue. So the absolute criteria present would be the ratio of the amount of money, as I've just said, spent outside of medical purposes, right? As I had just gone over. So, sorry, I'm looking at notes as well. So another thing that I was just talking about is the misleading drugs. That's also a massive issue. They mislead to the types of drugs that they sell. They say that it does this and it does this, but not as well as it says, and it also does this, which we have no idea. It could be bad, could be good, could be completely unrelated. I think that a solution we could have to prove it to solve this would be to deprivatize the pharmaceutical field, meaning the government would have to step in, right? And the government's already corrupt, so it could work, it could not. They would have to step in negotiating down a price of medication before it was able to be sold, right? However, this still concerns lobbying because that's their main thing, right? And um, to prevent lobbying, we could put a law in place. They could prevent companies from giving singular gifts to people, and if they do accept a gift, like when they're not supposed to, they would have to step down. They would have to leave office. That's really another law we could put in place to prevent the lobbying. Being able to pass this or not is where it gets into a gray area. The ones to implement this solution would ultimately have to be those in the higher echelon of the U.S. government throughout like a 5+ year plan, I believe. It would take a long time to fix this. But that's, again, the issue is they're the higher people of government, right? So the solution would primarily have to take place in Congress and the Senate because that's where stuff is decided, right? As they're the ones actively participating in the lobbying, right? Now, the role that we need to play as US citizens is to begin with educating ourselves on big pharma and why it's an issue, which is why I've chosen to give something over this speech because I feel very strongly about it, right? It would be one of the hardest battles we've ever fought for in the US. And there's wars and there's also horrible, horrible things, but big pharma is massive. It really, really hurts us as a nation. We're just on a slow decline while the top 1% keeps benefiting off of it until eventually they're going to also put themselves in the hole and they're not going to be able to get out of it. So, uh, the solution is presented in that one theory, it completely eradicates further corruption, right? And completely sweeps the rug out from the lobbyists. Because if we were to implement this law, they would be ruined, right? There would be nothing they could do, right? They would have to abide by this law. Otherwise, it'd be illegal and they'd have to step out of office, which would be our goal. Now, in terms of like the criteria I was speaking of earlier, new laws and regulations would eliminate lobbying as well as inflation of the pharmaceuticals. However, this one will result in a lot of negotiations that will be extremely tough and not easy to move past. Now, this form of elimination of larger like monopolies has been done multiple times before in the past. Namely, like I said earlier, Big Railroad. Big Railroad was a huge one. It was taken down by splitting it into multiple companies to deprivatize it. So it couldn't just be two or three people that were completely taking advantage of one thing in particular. Now, the inaction, if we did nothing, the inaction of this solution would ultimately result in, as I've said earlier, a complete and total collapse. We would be absolutely hosed in multiple forms of economy, specifically almost the entirety of the medical field, right? Because that's all the money. There's nobody able to afford it. And if nobody can afford it, they're not making money. They're not making money. They run out of money. All of us are done. There's nothing we can do about that. We have to fix this now. That's our only option. Now, now, stipulations agreed upon in this, will most likely be voiced by those that are effectively being lobbied. So the people that fight against it will be the people that are actively lobbying, because that means less money for them immediately. Of course, they're going to throw a fit about that, and that's a huge issue all in itself. Let's say that the eradication is just completely overturned because it's already too large, right? If untouched, it's completely certain that the final stage will be complete government collapse. Money will continuously be poured in and outside, and then everybody will run out of all of their money. The only ones able to afford it will be the end will be people that own the companies. And if they own the companies and they're the ones that can afford it, they're just going to be paying. That doesn't work. It's like a one-way street. It's just not. It just wouldn't work. We'd be done, right? Now, with this harsh reality, it is far and like scary, and I don't mean to fearmonger by talking about it, but we can't let fear motivate our decisions anymore because right now we're not doing anything because we're being complacent. We're being stuck and put in one spot because we're afraid, and that in itself is a huge issue. Now, fear mongering in the field of mortality is ridiculous. It is so egregious and crazy, and I have never understood why the government and the US has fear mongered its own citizens to get us to be complacent. It's horrible. And the first step to get away from it is to educate yourself with this speech or with plenty of other sources. I'm definitely not the best source that there is. There are plenty of other like research articles from like huge colleges, other massive medical companies that are against big pharma. There are so many resources to get away from big pharma, to take a first step away from it. To those of you that like let's see this, it may just be you, Ms. Linsenmeyer, but if anybody ever felt unaffected by big pharma, simply by engaging in like the bystander effect, you're just kind of like, well, I don't notice it, like I have the money to afford it, so I guess it's not that big of a deal. It's going to hurt everybody around us, right? While we can't think of personal examples, there are plenty in like most families where they've been extremely affected by the prices of certain drugs, and that's horrible. There's nothing we can do about that. Um, and next time you speak to somebody about the medical field or about medications in particular, ask them about how the medical field's assistance has actually done anything for them, or ask them how they've been treated in terms of getting a hold of certain things or getting specific treatments. And then ask them how it's changed from when they were younger to now. And not necessarily just in advancements, but in the exclusivity of new age medical, right? It's all of this like new and like sure, like it's technological advance, but new methods are all hidden behind a massive, never-ending paywall that just nobody's going to be able to climb over. And if we don't start making an attempt or a charge to fix it now, then there will be nothing that we can ever do. We don't have a lot of time left, and that is extremely unfortunate. That is the conclusion of my speech. Um, I have my references in front of me. I guess I can read them out. So one of them is the author is Compton C. This is a recent article from 2024. The website is Big Pharma, Drug and Device Companies, Lawsuits and Facts. I do have it linked in a previous assignment. And then another author, Pravnav G, also from 2024, and it's the world's 50 largest pharmaceutical companies. I used that second website to kind of see which companies I needed to research in specific to see which. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I used that website to see which companies I needed to research more, which companies were more affected in big pharma, and which companies could be thrown into the echelon of big pharma but are not actually big pharma, if that makes sense. Thank you so much for the extension on all of this. I'm aware that it's been extremely difficult, and I'm finally able to talk again after the procedure. So thank you so much for the extension, and I hope you have an amazing day.